Michael Harding. We're here today in the Michael Harding Colour Mill. The background sound you will hear is the sound of paint being made, so please forgive us. It's a work in progress. Now, I'd love to talk to you today and tell you a little bit about how and why I got going as a paint maker. Many years ago, late 1970s, I was an art student in a place called Epsom, which is on the edge of London. And I was fortunate enough to be at a college which had great sympathy for traditions of fine art rather than sort of the new conceptual aspects of fine art, which suited me. I was a figurative painter, still am, and I'll tell you that really the gist of how and why I started making paint. One day I was coming to the end of my 3 years fine art course, and I decided to sort of treat myself to a day up in London, in the centre of London, and of course went to the National Gallery, our National Gallery, and headed, of course, straight for the Flemish section where all the Rembrandts are, which is where I normally go, even to this day, and pay homage. And I was looking at various paintings and I was thinking, how and when and will I ever be able to paint like this? Now, clearly, the great advantage, if you like, that Rembrandt had particularly was his genius. Something I'm still working on to this day, and of course we can all joke about it. No, I never achieved the genius or the ability of Rembrandt, but I like to think that I've been able to achieve some of the paint qualities that you would recognise in his work by replicating the nature of paints that the old masters would have used, and we now hopefully have the ability to use today. When I looked at particularly one Rembrandt, it's for me the quintessential self-portrait. It's the one with the rounded top, and it's described as a self-portrait at the age of 34. To me, as I say, it's the quintessential Rembrandt, and it's just, if you get the opportunity, please go and have a look, and you will be amazed, like you should be with all of Rembrandt's work. But significantly for me, I looked at this and thought, well, why aren't my paintings like this? Putting the genius aspect aside, even the paint surfaces seem to be completely different, and even if you imagine a brown background, I thought to myself, well, my paints don't look like this. What's going on here? And of course, I looked at a little caption which has been, alongside every painting, which says who the artist was and what year it was painted on. And of course, in this case, it said oil on panel or oil on linen. And I thought to myself, well, this is strange because I can't get my paints to look like this, even if you just look at a flat area of colour, a brown background, for instance. So I went back to college, and I think within most colleges there's always a sort of a guru of materials and stuff like this, a go-to guy. My go-to guy was a tutor by the name of Graham Beeching. Graham was a fantastically eccentric guy with incredible knowledge about many subjects. And when I nonchalantly sat down in front of him and said to him, Graham, I've just been up in the National looking at some Rembrandts, he just started going, yes, I know what you're going to say. And I said, yeah, what's going on? Because our paints that we have today don't look anything like that. He said the significant thing you have to remember, Michael, is that at one time artists used to make all their own paints. And of course a little light went on in my head at the time thinking, maybe that's the answer, I should be making my own paints. So Graham continued to explain that when you make your own paints, you essentially are using pigment and oil and don't put in all the other junky filler type things that a lot of manufacturers do today. And so you make the best paint you possibly can, and generally be using it within 48 hours of it being hand ground. So of course, light went on in my head thinking, well, I'll start making my own paint. And Graham said, if you want to know more, Michael, grab the book that matters, which is the Ralph Mayer book. You see that title from here. The Artist's Handbook of Materials and Techniques by Ralph Mayer. This is the 5th edition. There's been a number, of course. And within it, there's a section on how to make your own oil paints. And so, of course, I thought with the typical youthful enthusiasm and naivety that this would be very simple and I would be painting like Rembrandt by the end of the year. I'm still working on that 40 whatever years later. But the key thing is the book teaches you the principles of oil paint and how it is made. And I invite everyone to get a copy. You should all have one of these in your studio anyway, because it's not just on oil paints, it's loads and loads of materials, and indispensable for an artist. So within the book, it taught me the principles of paint making. So I started making my own colours, and I went immediately for umbers because they seemed to be the easier part of a Rembrandt to actually create and then paint out. And as soon as I was hand grinding, I noticed there was a luminosity, a greater clarity, if you like, a silkiness, which seemed to be, very inviting and also more reminiscent of the sort of the backgrounds I was expecting from a Rembrandt. Fellow artist students came to my studio and they'd look at my painting and say, "Oh, someone's having a bit of a breakthrough. What is it? A new medium that you've picked up from someone?" I say, No, I'm making my own paint. And they, first of all, they didn't believe me. And then when I showed them the slub and muller and all the rest of it and the pigments, they go, okay, can we try a bit? So, of course, I gave friends some paints to try, and lo and behold, they were back at my studio door the next day saying, "This is really good. You need to come and see our paintings. You've got something here," because we're all sort of having this jump forward in terms of the quality of the paints. So then I had this idea, as I was coming to the end of my 3 years doing fine art, that instead of getting a job as a waiter or a barman until I become an internationally famous artist, I could make paint for artist friends. And I sort of thought to myself that maybe if I've got 10 artist friends and I'm making their paints and supplying them colours, this would be enough to make a living on. Surprisingly to me, it sort of exploded a bit, because no sooner had I left college and the artist friends were taking it, the word was spreading out like ripples in a pond. And it wasn't long before I was starting to get phone calls from restorers at, say, the Victor and Albert Museum, working on restoration projects, and could I make them things like lead primers. And additionally, then I would get a call from the Royal College of Art from a guy named James Trimble, asking me if I could produce paints for the students. And initially, of course, I thought, well, yeah, this is great, this is easy, a month or two's work like this. But of course, the projects they were sort of throwing at me in terms of the scale, the numbers of colours, it meant that I literally had to devote my life, if you like, for months making these special orders of paint, which was fine. That was okay. And then, of course, it started to grow as a business until I moved to a light industrial unit, and then from there I did a silly thing. I started advertising and trying to sort of, if you like, hit the big time as a business. And before I knew it, I was starting to get sort of advertising debts, and I wasn't sort of making the payments in time. And suddenly the whole thing overwhelmed me. And at the age of early 20s, I just sort of tried to walk away from it. It was all too much. And running any business is hard work. And even if you're an artist selling paintings, that's a business. And there's always these financial laws of physics that come along and surprise you when things don't work out. So lo and behold, I got taken to court for an advertising debt. And that was rather a significant day, because it was also the eve of the big hurricane that we had on the 15th of October 1987. I woke up the next day and I was in a new industry, forestry, which I loved. I was taking all the old trees that had been blown down on estates in southeast England, cutting up the timber and selling it, which I absolutely loved. And I loved the countryside and natural history. So that was rather nice. I was still looking at the landscape like an artist, thinking, oh yeah, that would make a painting. But anyway, the years ticked past, and before I knew it, all the timber clearing up that was required had been done. And I was scratching my head thinking, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? And I was sitting talking to a very old friend of mine, a guy called Neil Farquharson, saying to him, what am I going to do? I'm an artist, but it's hopeless to try and make a living like that. And he just said, actually, Michael, I think I might have something for you. Neil at the time was working in one of these sort of museum things called a Day at the Wells, meaning Tunbridge Wells, where they have like a living museum. And they had a project where they needed a big mural painted. So he said, look, if you like, I can introduce you to the people there. And if you get the work, it could be just what you're looking for, to paint scenes of Tunbridge Wells from sort of 1640. Lo and behold, we met. They commissioned me to do these large murals. And of course, not surprisingly, I was getting through huge volumes of paint. And not surprisingly, I then had to start making my own paints again, which was feeling rather jaded by the experience of the business, which hadn't worked the first time around. But I managed to push through that, and I went to London one day, and I met the editor by chance of the magazine that I'd placed the advertisements with years before, and explained to them that I was now getting back into business, if you like. And the guy said, "Oh, there's someone you need to meet. Lady and gentleman called Mr. and Mrs. Winthrop at Atlantis." Atlantis, some of you might know to this day, is a huge warehouse store in London selling wonderful art materials. And this gentleman said, "Go along there, introduce yourself. Who knows, it might be just what you're looking for to be able to sell your paints." And I did, and I met Mark Winthrop, and immediately he and I sort of hit it off. He liked what I was doing. But he and his wife they're experienced business people. And they looked at me and said, "Well, look, this sounds a great idea. But the problem is, and the problem you had before, is that you're not capitalized. And there's so many things, so many aspects to starting a business. We've got an idea. Why don't you come and do it here with us? We've got this huge building." And they at the time were in Brick Lane, which of course some of you will know the name of from the Brick Lane set of paints and so on. We've got so much space here because they had part of the Truman building, which is still there to this day. And we have, if you like, a captive audience of artists, hundreds of artists coming through the door on a daily basis. You could be our in-house paintmaker effectively. So that's what we did, and we were working together very happily for about 4 or 5 years until, lo and behold, I neglected an aspect of paint making, which I knew about, but as I say, I neglected it. Cleaning up paint with rags. If you clean knives, equipment, palettes, and screw up nice cotton rags with oil paint on, and put them into a bucket to be disposed of, and by whatever means, when oil paint dries, it absorbs oxygen from the atmosphere. And that process also produces a little bit of heat. And you'll remember from school chemistry lessons that the more heat you have, the faster a chemical reaction is, and sort of more heat, more drying, more oil and oxygen absorption from the air, generating more heat. And it gets to the point where if you've got a whole pile of rags, they will self-combust. And it's the same principle that takes place within haystacks, and it's one of nature's natural processes. And it's not just a question of whether it's Michael Harding oil paints or anyone's linseed oil. Oil and rags has to be considered as a danger. So there I was at Atlantis. This would be 1999 by now, and I had a small fire. And clearly it became obvious to everyone that I'd rather outgrown, if you like, the space that I occupied Atlantis. So we parted company on good terms, and I moved down to Whitechapel. And that's where I was for many years. Now, the question, coming back to oil paint making and what makes our paints different, the key thing for me is essentially that you have to make paint with just pigment and oil. But other things that make us sort of rather unique is, of course, we have the real paint colour strip on here. This is real paint, so that when you're in a store looking at our tubes, you know exactly the colour that's within the tube. You don't need to take the cap off and look at it. We also put on the side of the tube all the type of information that you as an artist would need to know, the pigment nature, whether it's organic or inorganic, whether your oil content is low or high, what the drying oils are, and all that sort of information that will help you when you're executing a painting. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, does this really matter? It does to some artists, doesn't to others. But think, for example, if you're a landscape painter and you're out in the landscape and you've got a huge canvas and you're painting perhaps for a couple of days, and then you have to transport that painting somewhere. If you've chosen colours which are very slow to dry, things like maybe alizarin crimson or lamp black, and you've piled it on nice and thickly, of course those are going to take a long time to dry. So really, it's sometimes helpful to try and to choose colours which are helpful to make the process easier for you. So you might choose other reds and other blacks or browns which are going to speed the drying. So if you like, it's what I call making the materials your friends. And it doesn't matter whether you're a portrait painter or a landscape painter or a non-figurative person. Understanding the materials, I know, will make you a better painter. In the same way that if you're a carpenter and you go to the forest and you understand the tree, it will also make you a better maker of furniture or whatever it is you're choosing to do as your art form. Now, following on from the information about the rags, which is essential for all painters to know before they start painting, should be lesson 1 before you're really even allowed to sort of start squeezing paint out of the tube, if you think about it, because it has to be safety first every time. Toxicity. A lot of artists like to paint wearing the gloves, the nitrile gloves, rather like a surgeon wears. This is up to the individual. Now, I always get paint on my hands. I even demo with paint, which I will be in a minute. As I understand it, paint cannot penetrate through the skin. Some solvents can, but there are no solvents within our oil paints whatsoever. People often ask me, are your paints solvent-free? Which colours are solvent-free? And I say, well, all of them. Because we're only really working with linseed oil or safflower oil or walnut oil, it's very simple for us. A pigment particle is a non-soluble little lump of colour, microscopic in size, and it cannot penetrate through the skin. This skin, which of course is an organ of the human body, is designed to do one thing, which is, one of many things, but essentially to keep things like bacteria and viruses out of us. And it does it very well, as is apparent, otherwise we'd all be dead. So if you think a pigment particle is infinitely much bigger than a bacteria cell or a virus cell. So because a particle is a non-soluble little lump of colour, this acts as a barrier. Now, however, yes, you can get poisoned by paint, but the only way you can get poisoned is if something gets inside you. So you must learn not to let it get inside you. Stating the obvious here. For instance, when I fiddle with paint with my fingers, I make sure that my hands are scrupulously clean before I eat. I also don't put brushes in my mouth. I mean, I remember some years ago, actually coming back, I'll tell you a little story about when I was a student in Epsom. I remember one day I was painting away, and I had the palette in one hand, and you get to a point, I'm sure we've all done this, you get to a point where you're juggling brushes everywhere like this, and so one brush goes in here, like that, and then you carry on painting the rock oil. That's a bit of a thick one. You might end up with 2 brushes in your mouth. And a friend called out, "Michael, are you coming for coffee?" And I said, yeah, I'll be there in a minute. And he went on, and I sort of stood there with all these brushes in my hands and thought, got to get out of here, got to get out of this, painting's driving me mad. So of course I threw everything down and walked out of my studio and straight down onto Epsom High Street. Now, Epsom had a lot of students at the time because there was also a ballet school virtually next door. I think it's called the Lane School of Dance, if I remember correctly. And so there were all little ballerinas walking around. And I remember I walked straight out of the street and I saw 3 very attractive young ladies coming straight towards me. And they were, to say they were checking me out was an understatement. They were smiling and nodding at me like this as I walked past. And I was thinking, wow, something's working out nicely. I must have it today. Maybe it's the way I've done my hair or something. So I walked down the street, and sure enough, then a couple more passed me by, and they were checking me out as well. I'm thinking, wow, this is almost too much. I then arrived into the cafe, and my friends just looked at me and said something to the effect of, "Have you seen your face?" And that's when the penny dropped. I realised something wasn't quite right. And they just said, "You need to go and look at yourself in the bathroom." Well, when I got to the bathroom, I had streaks. I looked like I was probably part of the cast from Cats, actually. Maybe that's why the ballerinas liked it. From where the handles of my brushes have been dirty. And I've done this so I look like a cat. So the secret of attracting the attention of young ballerinas is paint your face like a cat. They love it. Anyway, I know it is a little bit of a humorous story. My wife always likes me to tell that one when I'm talking to arts groups. But the key message is keep the paint away from your face. As I say, something can only poison you if it gets inside you, so don't let it get inside you. Now, the other aspect to getting paint on your hands and stuff like that is food in the studio, coffee cups, whatever it might be. I think we've all done that thing where you're painting away and you've got your coffee cup over here and it's closely in proximity to where also you're cleaning your brushes in whatever sort of liquid you've got for that. And you swish around here and you're thinking you're in your medium or your dilutant, and you're actually finding in your coffee cup. And then, of course, you take a swig of the coffee. That's the sort of thing you've got to look out for and avoid, a sort of that potential mishap like that. Most of the paints that we work with are completely non-toxic, and even if you did eat a chunk of paint, it would just pass through. Of course, linseed oil is also seen as a health supplement. Some of the pigments, though, if you're in part of the world where you can still use lead white, that's one you've got to be careful of, because that is one which the body does have the ability to break down and absorb, if you like. So the key thing is keep foodstuffs, keep hands away from the mouth, wash your hands before you eat. The other thing is that because all our paints are solvent-free, you will not get a headache from ours. We do some products, the mediums of course, which have genuine turpentine in. Genuine turpentine should also be regarded as toxic because the fumes that come off it can cause headaches and stuff like that. So we always advise, if you're working with the turpentine-based mediums, to ventilate the studio very, very well. We've also recently developed a range of mediums called our miracle mediums. Now, when I listen to many artists in terms of their needs, I try and develop materials which I know that will be of use for them. And the one cry for help, which has gone on for decades, if you like, the one cry and help that people have asked, which have gone on for decades, of course, is could you make a medium which we can use in the studio as both a medium to paint with and as a medium for cleaning brushes and stuff like that, which doesn't give us headaches, is non-toxic, non-flammable. And I sort of thought, wow, that's a big ask actually, because to have a medium a material that we can work with in our studios which ticks all those boxes. And so I engaged a couple of chemist friends who are the really clever guys. And incidentally, everyone, I also insist it should be completely biodegradable and vegan. And when I was saying this, and then they were sort of like scratching their heads, thinking like, oh dear, how are we going to do this? Lo and behold, after developing something for several years, they came up with a product we're calling our miracle medium. I cannot believe how this has taken off since we launched it. It's virtually, there's the slightest odour. If you did drink it, you would spit it out. It tastes disgusting, and yes, I have tasted it. The good thing about it is that even if I did drink a bit, it's not considered at all toxic. And the toxicologists who evaluated it for us said that their advice is that if someone does inadvertently drink it, keep an eye on them. So it's pretty good news. It's vegan. It's 100% vegetable matter. You can use it both as a medium in your paint, or if you prefer, you could be working with all the other mediums, but just use this as your cleanup. It's technically a diluent. It's not a solvent. It has no solvent in it. The other great bit of news is that should you have a screwed up piece of paper that was on fire, and I do demo this occasionally. I won't do it here now because I think it's one of those things that next thing people would be calling them up and saying that I'm responsible for burning their studios down. But if you had a screwed up piece of newspaper on fire and you pour this stuff on, it puts it out. So it's completely non-flammable. Just trying to make sure I got all the credentials for it. Solvent-free, plant-based, odorless, non-flammable. What could be better? No headaches. So if you're a painter who's sensitive to turpentines and gets headaches, here you go. We also were fortunate enough that we were able to develop other mediums from it. The key thing is that it also dissolves damar crystals. So all the mediums which we have which use turpentine to dissolve damar crystal and wax and things like that, we can replace with the miracle medium. When I say replace, have alongside the existing mediums. So we've developed this whole tranche of miracle medium. Now, when I sat down and started thinking, what am I going to call this material? I didn't want to, There are other products out there made by other people, eco-friendly, this and that. I really thought I have to come up with a title that people would really think, oh yeah, this is something different. And one or two people contacted me saying, that's a bit of a tall claim, miracle medium, are you sure? And I've got emails to support. They've called me up and said, it is literally, like you say, a miracle as an answer for artist needs. So we're getting a great lot of interest in that. The other great advantage, of course, working with this small size is it can fly because it's non-flammable. Now, when I say fly, I'm not suggesting you take it in as your carry-on luggage, but it certainly can go in the luggage hold. And the credentials for it being, you'll see the little aeroplane there, which the pictogram so that people know it can fly okay. The great advantage, of course, about this particular medium is that we discovered it can dissolve damar crystals, which gives us the ability to make another range of mediums which don't have genuine turpentine in. So we have a range of mediums which are completely, again, low odour. Of course, if they've got linseed oil in, stand oil, they'll be flammable. But the great thing is that any of you who are sensitive to headaches, because you're now sort of working again with natural substances, it probably won't cause you headaches. So I'd love you all to try it. Now, I've got something else which I'm dying to share with you. Some years ago, we developed what we call our NAP primers, non-absorbent acrylic primers. And I've got a few here which I'm going to sort of just tell you about. The number one call I get from artists, well, one of many number one sort of problem troubleshooting things that artists will call up and ask about. Sometimes artists will be in their studio, they'll do a painting, start a painting, and the next day they come into the studios and find that all the colours have gone rather dull looking, matte looking. The term is they've sunk. And what's happened there generally is that the oil has been drawn out, sucked out by whatever primer they've either used or the surface has been prepared for them with. And that's because they're porous, so they suck that oil out and render the paint above dull and matte looking. The irritating side of that, of course, is that, let alone the fact that the colours have now, they're less fruity, it means that you artists generally end up having to develop a technique, something like the term is oiling out, or the application perhaps of a retouch varnish. Now, all those things that you then have to start doing to compensate for this, from my point of view, start to, if you like, hinder that process, that ability to be able to paint fluently. And they become, let alone distracting, it starts meaning that you're having to almost fight the materials. The materials should be your friends and working with you when you paint, so that I would say to artists, painting is a very hard process to do anyway. So let's not make it any harder. So you want to have these materials working for you. Now, as I say, artists will call me up and sort of say, my painting's gone dull and matte, and I invariably say to them, are you painting on an acrylic gesso or an acrylic primer? And they go, yes, how did you know? What's that got to do with it? And then I explain that porous nature of those primers will suck the oil paint out and leave it rather dull looking. So we decided if we could find a way of making an acrylic primer that doesn't do it, but at the same time is absorbent enough so that it has the interface, if you like, between the various layers of the painting from the primer to the first coats. And we developed what we call our non-absorbent acrylic primers. We launched the white initially, and it just went crazy because it does exactly what it's meant to do. It primes, produces a highly light, fast white. In the context of that, in itself, its own very light, fast colour, and although it absorbs a slight percentage of the oil, it doesn't absorb anything like the amounts that the normal acrylic gessos would. So that means your paint will stay luscious looking, which of course we as oil painters always like that sort of fruity, gorgeous, luscious quality. And then after a while, we thought, well, I wonder if we can do it with other colours, and so we developed a number of other colours. But before we do that, I would also like to show you this, because it rather demonstrates, and maybe with the lights here I can help that. This is one of those horrible canvases that you can buy from cheap art materials stores. On the right, it's just the primer straight from the store. On the left, what I've done is I've literally taken our non-absorbent acrylic primer white and painted down this section. And if the camera can see that, I hope the camera can see that, you see that stain mark that exists around where the paint was. You can see here that the paint sits onto our acrylic primer with no staining, because for me that just confirms that the primer that's on there hasn't done its job properly. It's very important with a prime surface that the linseed oil from the paint cannot get into the canvas surface. I mean, all the books would tell you that that's a bad thing because it causes the crumble to the canvas, the linen, to eventually crumble. So this is clear indication that the linseed oil is leaking in there. Now, if I tin it around, it's even more telling, isn't it? I think you can see that, and you can see where even the colour is penetrating through. So this is these canvases are terrible, but we only just acquired it to be able to demonstrate this. So you can even take, you know, the expression "make a silk purse out of a sow's ear." To some degree, you can do that by putting our primer onto these canvases. I'd rather everyone actually just got good linen or a good panel and worked on sound supports like that anyway. But you can see here exactly what we're talking about. Now, the requests that came flooding in were for other colours, of course, in the non-absorbent acrylic primer. And this one here, the one in this container, is a burnt sienna. So we developed this one particularly, the idea being that you'd put a couple of layers perhaps of your white down and then go over with one layer of this, and you can make a mottled effect rather like a Giselle, you know, like the Italian sort of mottled effect, which a lot of artists like. Some artists will still paint in the same way by taking a wash of something like an umber and just taking it over. So they're in a multitude of colours. We've also got a particular green I personally like, because I'm a portrait painter as well as landscapes, and so when I'm doing portraits, it allows you to sort of have a, if you like, a ground colour that sort of can relate to Caucasian flesh tones, and it helps also with the shadows and things like that. So we do them in about 9 or 10 colours. We're actually enlarging that range as well, probably with some primers before the end of 2025, so look out for those as well. I'd like also to tell you a little bit more about the range and one or two unusual things that we're very lucky to have. For instance, the genuine Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Yes, this is the real thing, and a lot of you will know that at one time this particular pigment was more valuable than gold. Let's squeeze a little bit out and have a look. Now, when you consider that one time when artists only had this to be their blue, and I mean, look at that, isn't that gorgeous? And it even, I just always have to smell it. It's just such a gorgeous looking thing. Mother Nature's gift to us. The pigment is, of course, a mere 400 million years old. Comes from the I thought it was the Kocha Valley, but apparently there's a whole region that you can get lapis from in Afghanistan. My merchant tells me. Now, of course, that looks rather blue there, but then if you look at the modern equivalent, ultramarine blue, and you'll see why this was so prized. But this, of course, is what modern manufacturing can do. I mean, it's, to some that might be too extreme. I always think of this as a sort of subtle little old lady, and then we have a modern, powerful poke your eye out blue like that, and it has a wow factor. I think both of them have a wow factor in their own right. Now, something else I'd also like to show you about our range. This is just for fun, because when I was serendipitously playing around some years ago, I spotted something in colour, which people always like me talking about, because when things surprise you, I call these colour journeys. And I'm going to have, just for fun, going to have a little bit of a quiz here, because I'll tell you what these colours are. This is transparent red oxide and phthalocyanine blue, phthalo blue to some. Now let's see what these gorgeous colours can look like here. Oh, look at that. And I mean, in terms of modern excellence, you can see why artists have never had it so good before. I often wondered, what the old masters have said, why do you need such extremely powerful colours when you can have something that's subtle like that? I don't know, the debate would go on. So we have these two colours here, and I hope you can see them. The question is, what colour do you think you get if you mix those two together? Transparent oxide red and phthalocyanine blue. Now, the answer can be a little surprising. You get a green. A lot of people think you're going to get a purple. So I always have fun when I'm doing actual live workshops in stores talking to artists. This is something I do, and I normally give away a Lapis tube and someone can get it right. But I think it's rather wacky. When you see it come to that, you think, oh yeah, of course, I can see how it would work. But when you have the two colours like that over there, and you're looking at the sort of the transparency, the red nature, you think, how can that make a green? But there you go, nothing up my sleeve, folks. I think you'll agree that's pretty strange that colour came out like that. For me, it is anyway. I'll do it again. You can see that little finger there is completely clean. Bit of the red, bit of the blue, and there you have a green. There, I can see it better there. So that's just for fun. Other colours which we're getting a lot of attention at the moment about is the cadmium green, which is a mixture actually of viridian and cadmium yellow. That's a traditional mix. Turner's yellow, a new one for us. I'm going to put some out because I just have to play with this. It's one of these things, whenever I see some colours, it's a bit like when you see a dog, you've got to go up and stroke it. I'm the same. It's a sort of, I have to sort of go over and play with the paint to sort of show people, just to sort of see what it's going to be like. Now that is a really high covering yellow, and I know it's going to be great with that transparent oxide red. For fun, I'm also going to randomly put it around here, the lapis. Not surprisingly, you get a green. So anyway, I just thought I'd have some fun with some other colours, and the smell is gorgeous. I wish you could smell this at home, folks. It really is lovely. Well, everyone, I've certainly enjoyed myself here today. This is what I do. I play with paint and mediums and stuff when I'm not painting. I hope you've enjoyed it. I will have more news for you soon, and please come and join me again in my colour mill. Thank you.